Ryan, 10 years ago, I think I probably had a little bit more blonde hair than right now, but I'm hanging in there. So let's get moving. I'll tell you one thing. Yeah, I don't know what it is about storm surveying that makes it a passion of mine. I can't even pin it to one reason, but I think part of it is just getting out there in the field and really seeing what has happened and trying to turn that around into our improving our warning decisions. I've gotten to the point where I was obsessed enough now that I'm actually co-chairing a standards committee in the ASCE, that's the American Society for Civil Engineering, to improve the ES scale, because I found some warts, and so I pulled together a stakeholders group consisting of engineers and meteorologists, many of which are in the field, and some of you might be here already attending, and so we're pushing there. And in fact, I think I'm going to put in a pitch for two people that are on the committee. One is Tim Marshall, who's coming up next for the next webinar, and then also I think Brian Smith and Lonnie Curtis will be talking a lot about some of the damage indicators that we'll have coming up. So I want to definitely have a shout out for them, and I think through both of their support and efforts and things like that, we're well on our way to making a new standard. And I really want to congratulate Tim for all the work that he's done. So let me go forth. I'm going to talk a lot about other things, but I have other acknowledgments too. You know, besides Tim, who's helped a lot in this talk here, as well as Tanya Brown Giamanco at the Insurance Business Institute for Home and Safety. Also Rick Smith, WFO. We've shared a lot of damage survey tips and ideas over the years. And I also interface a lot with Rich Thompson and Chris Carsons and Brian Smith at SBC with their research, and we've collaborated together on various activities. Chris is another one that's on our standards committee. Lonnie Curtis, again, up in northern Indiana, and then my wife, Daphne, who actually has been out in the field doing work for Vortex Southeast and has talked to a lot of storm survivors about how they managed to plan their decision making, taking shelter, and also learn more about the homes that they live in. So one of our case studies will come from one of those events in the Southeast. So here are the topics. So I got lots of topics, and I'll tell you one thing, I'll be a little bit scatterbrained, and I have to apologize in advance, but I'm going to try to stick to the plan here as much as possible. So we're going to talk right from the top, and I was requested to kind of cover some things and aspects of damage surveys, because I know there's a lot of people out there, a lot of you have varying degrees of experience, and so I'm going to try to lift all the boats up to the same level. If you've been around the block, I certainly encourage comments from you. I mean, you might do things that are different. They're not wrong. They're just different. I tend to focus a lot on the way we do things here in Norman, because I've participated in so many surveys with the Norman office. And so we kind of go in lockstep. Again, so lots of diversity there. But I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to put my spin on it. You're going to see a little bit on survey types and what kinds of surveys and when you might want to implement this type or that type. And some of them, and a lot of them these days, are remote. It's just the way it is, and I've participated in a lot of surveys remotely as a result. Also, we're going to talk about preparing for damage surveys, and most really important, I think this is increasingly important as more of us have gone and done damage surveys. We've seen, the impacts that tornadoes and violent weather have on communities, and so managing critical stress, incident stress, is important. And there's training on it now that we've developed, the learning office between Christina Crow and Rick Smith, so I'll relay some of that. Then we'll dive in. Next hour, track analysis, discriminating tornado from other events, contouring, using non-DIs, a lot of aerial imagery. I'm going to be focusing a lot on aerial imagery there. And so there's some available in the current version of the DATS that's kind of exchanged for some of the other stuff that kind of fell off the wayside, but we need to get back to. So, and if we have time, we can talk about trees. I love trees. I plant a lot of them. and I've learned a lot about how they perform in high winds. We're putting a lot of that science into the standards. So let me just go through. And by the way, I don't know what kind of feedback, Ryan, you're going to allow, but I'm certainly willing to take it from here and there. So I'll stop and see if there's any questions or comments or anything like that.
Okay,
so
and I'll be watching the question box for us, and I'll either interrupt or hold off till the end of the first session.
Sounds great. And by the way, if you hear a cat meowing in the background, he's a noisy one, so you may see him walking in front of my face every so often. Okay, so purpose of damage surveys. Most of them, that I attend have immediate interest because I participated in a lot of quick response teams, as well as working some big events in my time. But sometimes immediate interest surprises me with even relatively minor events. So that's certainly one of the big ones, is satisfying the appetite of the media for knowing what this tornado is all about and how strong it was. And those kinds of answers we have to provide, and on a time clock too. So that's a big one. Climatology is another one. We're all here supporting storm data, and storm data cycles back. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why it's so important to conduct the surveys that we do. To support the communities, so we're talking about incident response, the quick response as well as longer term response. In other words, determining whether an area needs a disaster declaration. I've had people from FEMA come up to me and ask, is this it, or is there some other stuff? And I had to tell them, it's like, this isn't it. There's a lot of other stuff down here or that way. So they're going out in the field determining whether a community qualifies. I put 3 question marks in there. Certainly it's open-ended. If you got other reasons for surveys, definitely let me know. I can tell you one, and I'll put out a couple of them, but one of them could be is that we have to support research and development. That's where SPC comes in. A lot of what we're doing is cycling back to helping them actually improve not only the survey process, but also improve the warning process. So they've come up with a lot of guidance, at least in the tornado warning process, that we couldn't do impact-based tornado warnings without. So I'll put it out there, leave those other question marks open, and that's something for you to think about. What other purposes have you seen out there in the field that you've gone out? I certainly would be willing to engage and list out all the things that we've seen where our surveys support. But meanwhile, let's go ahead and move on. I have a whole set of things. Okay, so I'm a proponent of getting as much information out there as possible. But I also have to be cognizant of the fact that there's time limitations, and that this takes staff hours, and that's staff hours that sometimes is not available, only because we don't have, either we have weather coming up or we have shortages in our staffing, things like that. So I understand those things kind of happen. And, there are a couple ways to help mitigate that over time and so forth. And so I'll try to relate that as well. Certainly scientific understanding. This is where SPC comes in, but not just SPC. There's a whole congressional act called the Windstorm Impact Reduction Act. And in the process right now, there's a whole new tornado resilient design building code going into the building standards, along with hurricane resilient, earthquake resilient design, snow loads, everything else. This is the first time ever that we're doing this. Not me directly, but a lot of engineers involved with the Civil Engineering Society. And so that chapter is almost done. And part of that chapter is coming up with a new risk analysis of tornadoes, not just for points, but also areas. And that's the key thing, is understanding the areas. And they had to make a lot of assumptions. They had to make assumptions based on storm data, which are only a few points, start, end, and width. and they actually need a little bit more than that. Better warning communications, better relationship to radar data. And as it turns out, some new work that's being done, Chris Carson's is actually helping to improve the preliminary track analysis using our high resolution data as ground truth to help improve producing initial preliminary track contours. All right, so anyway, risk assessment. Yeah, that's a key thing. This came out of findings from the Joplin tornado. And that's where, some of the findings in there is improving hazard characterization, buildings, sheltering designs, and so forth, and also improving emergency communications. And of course, the recommendation is that tornado hazard maps be improved for municipalities and for critical facilities of different sizes. As you probably are not surprised, a town is a lot more likely to get struck by a tornado than any one building inside. The same can be said for large facilities versus small. And so these kinds of maps are old. These are getting old. A lot of them are out of date. So there's going to be new ones with new improved, recovery or recurrence intervals. But again, a lot of it is dependent on data that's somewhat limited and a lot of assumptions that go into it. So what are those assumptions? Well, one of them is this, okay? They have to make an assumption on a exponentially decreasing area occupied by stronger winds within a tornado track. So if you get a strong tornado or something like that, they apply this exponential curve and determine the area for the stronger tornado winds within the entire envelope. But we've seen a lot of variations from that. And one of them is, for example, the May 3rd, 99 outbreak. We did contouring analysis back then. Wasn't too often that one was done, but this was a critical big event and a research opportunity. So we did that, and we came up with a much different curve with much higher portions of the entire track occupied by stronger winds. So how often does that occur? Well, we're probably getting a better idea given all the stuff that's out there. So, this all feeds into coming up with recurrence intervals for various strength tornadoes impacting critical facilities, such as nuclear power plants, transmission lines, and communications and so forth. So think about those kind of things come directly in to what we're doing here as an agency. Okay, so yeah, high resolution DI by DI surveys. This is another one here. So all the points in the DAT have been taken and then filtered, quality controlled, and then used in Smith's latest papers. This 2020 paper, both in weather analysis and forecasting, looking at improving guidance for high impact-based tornado warnings and using such things as the near storm environment, as well as the strength of the radar signatures here. And they're including population density factors in there to account for the fact that, yes, tornadoes are underreported in rural areas. So with all that, they're coming up with a probability that you may have, let's say, different urgency levels of a tornado warning, with the highest here up in level 4 and 5. Level 5 really only being achievable if you have a certain population density. So this kind of stuff is based on the high resolution surveys we've given them. Certainly they're interested in improving that. And then I kind of alluded to this before with Chris Carson's talking about high resolution surveys with as a ground truth basis for improving the preliminary track tool. And they're taking events with contouring. And I know they have several events, and they're doing a demonstration of how effective this would be. Basically, what it is they're taking the radar data, if you're close enough to the radar, and looking at the attributes of the vortex signatures in there, and then applying a vortex model on top of that to then fill in the gaps, so to speak. And so this is an example. A contoured tornado from ground surveys and more, ground and aerial, and then their preliminary track tool that they could literally put out inside of an hour after an event, and then supply that to anybody that needs it. So it gives them an idea that, hey, there's some potential for some really useful information, but you can see that there's some potential for improvement, because here we have the latter part of the track where the preliminary estimate is undercutting the actual observations that we saw. And of course, a lot of that might have to do with the vagaries of radar sampling. So those are the justifications why we want to, as much as possible, provide the high resolution surveys. Okay. Oh, I put this in here. One thing that would help a lot is that we have, so these are some of these things, and this carries over from the old DAT. So one of them that makes it a lot easier to compile these, from the back end of the DAT, is trying to group these DI points by event ID. And hopefully a lot of us are doing this now, but if you're not, something to think about is grouping points, polygons, and lines for a single event, into one ID. And then that would be making it much easier to search for after the fact, so to speak. So desirable track attributes, again, the tornado path. Another one here that's often is not being used so much is the direction of damage. So this is something that we want to make sure that if you see direction of damage, definitely put it down. I'll come back to this later on. Consistent method in determining width. This has always been a problem. This goes way back. And you can see the mean tornado width is due to various things. It's due to changes in the EF scale adoption. There's other issues with, looking at mean path widths. Now suddenly it's max path width. People know about those kinds of breaks. The more subtle ones are these drifts over time which occur. And so one of the things about tornado track analysis is coming up with as much information and guidance about where to draw the line between straight line wind and tornado track. Okay, tornado path center line. This is another one that's very important. Where do we draw that center line? And sometimes it's not so easy to figure out where that should be. So outer boundary, again, that's going to determine path widths as well. And the center line, where to start and stop the tornado is key. EF scale contours, I know, is strongly suggested. And time and DI permitting. I mean, if you don't have the DIs, you can't do this kind of thing. So it makes it tough for those rural tornadoes to come up with contours for everything. And I don't think anybody's demanding that. I don't think that's something. All I'm saying is that, the more opportunities that we have to provide some of this information, the more benefits there are downstream in operations. Okay. So any questions, at least at this point, that we've covered? These are all the justifications and pleas out there to do what we can to, provide this information for external and internal users.
Jim, we do have a couple questions. Jonathan Guzman asks, is there an NWS standard for assigning event ID in the DAT?
There is not. There isn't any in the instructions, and there isn't any here. But if anybody would like to chat, some ideas and so forth, it's always a good thing. I'm not going to, make it, my way, this kind of formatting or anything like that. I think this is an opportunity to kind of, provide some discussion and so forth. And then, maybe we can relay some of these things later on.
Okay, and another question we have, damage direction is 180 degrees from the wind direction to cause the damage, correct?
Yeah, so it's the direction in which the damage has gone, towards which the damage has gone.
Okay. Damage direction to what the damage has gone. Okay. And then in terms of questions, I don't see any other questions, but some comments on why your storm surveys are important. Feedback to the warning forecaster and staff is a reason we do storm surveys. Good public perception, recognition of the Weather Service. Let's see. Oh, there were a couple others. Help us learn more about radar signatures from radar, given that we have a confirmed tornado.
Absolutely. Those are all really valid. And I'll tell you one thing, that putting the public face out there in the communities is worth its weight in gold. And I've done a lot of that, and I've had nothing but good experiences. Nobody's ever shooed me off a piece of property. They've always welcomed me, despite what kind of hardship they've all suffered through. So I think that's something that will keep paying forward down the road. So anyway, yeah, let's see. Post-storm survey types. I'm going to talk a lot about this, and I'm including the preliminary analysis as one of them, because that really is a legitimate survey. It's after the storm, and you're providing information about what happened to your users. And so I count that as a survey. It's the first survey that we do. And I think we all know who benefits from these. They're the search and rescue people, the ones immediately need to know where to go and how bad you think it's going to be. Now, we're not providing that yet, the how bad part. Okay, although you probably have some idea and you probably conveyed it through your body language and so forth. But we'll provide, I think, with some of Chris's tools, it's going to be a lot more interesting and a lot more guidance there. So yeah, Charlie from Radar, spotter reports, that's the thing. And so that's one survey. The other one is going to be the on-site survey. And of course, this is where we spend most of our time dealing with things. But the on-site survey is the anchoring. That's what I call it as, because there's nothing like it to provide that. But I'll tell you one thing, the on-site survey, there are several subheaders in there, okay, because there's different ways you can do on-site surveying. And one of them, of course, is the detail survey. You're getting out of your vehicle, you're going right up with your ruler, and you're actually providing that detailed assessment of the structure. Of course, it takes a while, so we usually do this, especially when we're going after something that's important to rating the tornado. I think a lot of us understand that the highest priority is to get that rating as quickly as possible, and so we tend to gravitate towards where we think the worst damage is. All right, and then spread out from there. So that's something that's priority number one. And so these are the significant impacts, important to tornado rating. Also, detail, let's say, interviews with the owners. There's nothing like talking to an owner, a building owner, about the building that you're looking at, for all the details that you can't see with a photo or anything else. So another one, and I'll put this out here because I get this a lot, it's the documentation for quick response teams, because so many of them are remote. We need to have the documentation up there to really make a good judgment and provide some help. So along with this, yeah, there's a lot of stuff there. You can see there's a ruler, tape measure. Bring those along. By the way, I don't know if you can see this, but some of our phones have measurement tools, especially the ones with little onboard lidars that you can use, and you can provide this tool, and it actually works pretty well. Gets you within fractions of an inch, for measurements of 6 to 8 feet or so, and can nail down, even smaller than that, if you're looking at what's the diameter of a bolt or something like that. So if you have one of those phones that has that capability, then I think that's something that is really useful. But anyway, best practices. Speaking of, for on-site survey, and I have to iterate this a lot. We've had some challenges with previous on-site surveys. Last April and Easter, the Slidell office went up. One of the forecasters there went up to the damaged site, took some pictures, and we had a team look at it. And then we said, it's like, oh boy, if you could only get a couple of these pictures or something like that. And wouldn't you know it, she went right back the next day and took those shots and really kind of completed the picture overall. And so really want to thank her for doing that. It helped a lot. Because if we don't have these, then we're doing a lot of guessing. And then we wind up leaning more on all of those things that you find out about the scene that are not in the pictures by talking to people there that are on scene. So overall, this is what I desire here. I think everybody else does this remote. If you could take several pictures with the building in the context of its surroundings from some distance away, and then circle back, and get those close-up shots of what you think it's important. It's going to be, whatever the damage is, it's going to be the most critically related construction details that's with it. If it's a roof only, then you're taking pictures of the shingles, the connections between the top plates and the rafters, or it could be the gable ends, things like that. You're probably not going to be taking pictures of the foundation. If it's more than that and you got walls down, then the foundation comes into play. But there are other things too. There are weaknesses in the building that would be worth taking a picture of. Like how did the garage door fare, or window glazing. So those things are important because they're relevant to the damage that we see, or the collateral damage. So that's where you get out and use your ruler and tape measure and touch the wood, touch the components, determine if they're in good shape or not. Okay, so all of that is a little bit easier with the DAT now that it allows a few pictures for each point. I got more than a few pictures here listed, so I hear you, but I think it's really key. And also putting this in context of where you are relative to the tornado track. Where is this scene relative to other things around the area, just in case there's collateral damage, or perhaps there's terrain issues or other things. And you notice that there may be other DIs, other trees, outhouses, barns, things like that. So the toughest thing is, well, that's the on-site survey. Okay, that takes time. Sometimes it takes up to a half an hour just to sit there in one site and then do a walk around for the others, especially if you start talking to people that know about the building. So granted, that's going to be a significant chunk of time out there in the field. Transects is the other kind of survey. So you don't have time to get out of the car, but you want to generate points to get that track and have some, have some points that you can use to do some analysis. And for these reasons, you can't get out of the car. You have to become efficient at marking down points as you cut across the track analysis. So there are a few strategies for doing that. This example is from Bassfield, Mississippi, that tornado in Easter made by the Jackson office. And I think it's a good example of some of the kinds of transects that they've done down there. I'm sure it didn't take just one day to do this. It might have taken a couple days to get out there and complete the picture because this was a long track. So a couple ideas on how to do this. I put this together here. What I tend to do, and maybe some of you that have been around the block have done it slightly differently. But this originated way back from before we had any DAT, and we were doing this by pencil and paper on a topo map. And so usually what I do is at first damage, I'll go ahead and mark a first point. Now, I'm not right now thinking wind versus tornado. I'm just marking the damage where I see a considerable increase. So if I have a tornado embedded in damaging straight line winds, I'm probably going to mark where I start seeing some noticeable increase in intensity in that 0 to 1 point right there. But again, that's important. So I do that, and then every time I see the damage appear to make a jump, that looks like it's a new rating, I'll go ahead and stop and flag a point. A lot of times, most of the time, it's going to be trees and houses. Those are the two most common ones. Manufactured housing comes in third. And I'll do this up until I hit the peak. And so this is the max damage. This is probably where I'm going to get out and so forth. So that's number 3. And then I do this the same in reverse as I get out through the rest of the transect, marking where I think it's gone down by a rating or so. So, I mean, you can do that, and then you can get that transect. And as you can see, this is from the Huntsville office. They did this several times around the area. And they've taken actually more than one point at the same rating as they've gone through. So yeah, if you got time, certainly do that. And if you don't have to mark every single DI, just enough to get you an idea of what the contours might look like in that spot, that transect. So then at the last point, I just mark the last time you see, damage that looks like, it's above and beyond just the background, so to speak. So yeah, some caveats. Drive-by means surveyor is more prone to error. Your error bar is going to be bigger. You're not looking at details or anything like that. So, there's that kind of disclaimer that's out there. So time management's another one. In order to do some of these treks, it's going to take some hours basically to do it. And I don't see, and it's going to depend a lot on the road coverage. If you're in a city doing this, you're going to be very tempted to go block by block. And so your area of coverage is going to be a lot less. And so you'll need more teams if you have that. If not, then you're going to have to choose, I'll go section by section or something like that. Yeah, I'm going to miss some stuff in between. Complex damage patterns. Yeah, that does complicate simple transects. It slows you down because now it's like, well, is it going up and down legitimately because there's changes in wind or not? And so here's an example. I've got this aerial shot, and I've got a house here with walls down next to one that's got minor damage, next to one with more major damage, next to this one here with more walls down, but surrounded by more minor damage. And so that makes it definitely complex, and I wind up having to, in this case, wind up marking all of them. That was Enterprise, Alabama, back in 2007. Yeah, so what do you do? It's likely a multi-vortex tornado, and there's a lot of detail that's missed. So you can do what we do the best of given the time, and see how that goes. Let's see, Trek on-site surveys making use of comments. I'd like to put in a track edge if there is one, and then put in a track center line, where I think this is something, and this helps somebody back in the office or maybe later on figure out where to draw the lines and so forth. Okay, any other items not accounted for in the survey tool? I mean, I do this a lot, in case, for example, maybe I didn't take a picture and I want to make a comment that, this is collateral damage, or something else, that might affect the usage of that DI. Again, back to damage direction, you got ahead of me. I didn't mention here that the damage direction is useful. So it is in which the things are blown. It's useful for flagging confluence lines if you see where that might be. Easy. These are most amenable to isolated structures where you can see debris pattern. it's not merging with a whole bunch of others, or trees, for example. All of those can help quite a bit. Okay, and then another type of survey is the aerial. Aerial survey is one that, you know, if you're helping fill in the gaps, making the perimeter and the contouring. Platforms include UAVs, crewed aircraft, and high-res satellite. All of those come in. So this is Bassfield, Mississippi again, and somebody's drone, who actually now is a forecaster at the Jackson office. So give credit to Logan Poole here for this shot. Crewed aerial surveys is kind of a big deal, especially if you're invited to go up in the aircraft. Okay, so there are probably some issues. Back at the time, it was certainly issues, you know, depending on whether you had to have training, you know, to jump aboard an airplane or not. And so some of these details may have changed since I've dealt with it. This was back in 2007 in Florida. Either way, whether you're going on or you're using Civil Air Patrol, getting that preliminary track to the pilots is key, so they can plan their route. And another one is, you know, describe what you would like. If you have flexibility in terms of the flight path, you know, please describe that. My favorite and optimal one, if it can be done, is to fly both sides of the track. Basically a big loop around the track, so you can get all angles of all the damage indicators down below. If you are flying, hope you don't mind heights. Sometimes you may fly in a helicopter with an open door, for example. Another one is having adequate battery, like, you know, one of these 10,000 milliamp hour external batteries attached to your phone, for example. I think would be really key. And if you're going up, you're going to be prepared to resist the cold, especially if you have an open door plane or helicopter. A lot of times you might not want glass in between your camera and what you're taking a picture of. And also, don't be too proud to tell the pilot of any discomfort that you might have up there. Some of these pilots are literally, what can I say? I flew with a combat flight instructor once, and so he was flying like he was instructing. That was great for the first few rounds. Then it wasn't so great anymore. So here's an example of an ideal loop we did around the Moore tornado. It was a simple track. I just took it and went around one loop, 20 miles long, and that took care of it. So we were down inside of an hour. This is the plane or the helicopter that we flew in, Oklahoma Highway Patrol, with no doors right there. So it made for great viewing. Later on, this was a picture that we had in Florida. This was the luxury helicopter. It was a Black Hawk. And they didn't fly that like a combat flight instructor. They kept that one quiet and steady. Drones, yeah, we still can't use them on the job, so to speak. So if you're gonna fly one and you're a federal employee in the Weather Service, you better be on annual leave. Even then, it might be, you know, dicey. Really, we need to depend on drone flyers from other government, private, professional, academic researchers, hobbyists. Take it from anywhere. Many EMs have them now. Police are out there and are very willing to share. So some of these things, I mean, the awesome thing about it, and this is Bassfield again from Logan, he flew straight to this structure that's been wiped off and flew within inches of it. So we could literally do everything what we needed to as if we were on site using the drone. As it turns, he was on site. But very inexpensive, you know, lots of ways to fill in 3-mile gaps, you know, because you have to be within line of sight. But issues, it can be expensive to supply orthographic imagery. In other words, geotiffs, things like that we can put in with that. Most of the time it's not. Okay, so other considerations. Oblique versus vertical imagery. I do this a lot because Each one has its advantage, like the NOAA P3 on the right, and another one I'll show you. You get that vertical, it's orthographic, it's mappable. We can paste it right in the DAT, no problem. Oblique, though, has its advantages because of the potential for high resolution, in addition to the fact that you can see damages on vertical surfaces that you cannot see from looking straight down. And so I get this picture of the house on the left and the right, and you can probably see all the details that you want, considering damage to walls on the left. You might see some details that you can't see looking straight down. And so it does have its unique things. And that's why I like to fly on both sides, to get both sides of each object. Okay. By the way, that last one was from Alabama in 2011. Okay, so survey types, virtual surveys, again, like we've done with the quick response teams and so forth. We did a few of these here this year. The other one too is depending more and more on our partners, such as emergency managers, spotters, amateurs, police departments, etc. This has happened several times here in Norman. They would send information up, such as this message here on the right, and it was awful handy that the pictures were geo-encoded so that we knew where they were. A lot of times people like this send pictures and they don't tell us where they were, which kind of limits their usefulness. So yeah, especially with drone imagery. So make sure that you let them know if they can really help by sending and telling us where they were from. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Any questions, at least in survey types? Those are the kinds of things and strategies that I was covering.
I don't have any questions in the question box on survey types. There was a comment though, don't necessarily have to be on board the aircraft these days with the sophisticated camera equipment that you were just talking about. As long as it's geolocated, that can be useful. So that was just one of the comments in our question box, but I don't see any other questions in there.
No, I think that's for sure is right. But never turn down an offer, especially if you like to go up. All right, so next thing I want to go ahead and go through is just talking about preparing for a survey, and this is a lot of this is coming from Rick's stuff and us, and kind of talking back and forth and so forth. This is where I think most WFOs have a survey prep checklist, a guide, and the operations plan, and so forth. And so there might be some variations. So I'll just walk through and just kind of talk about it, because I think every WFO has a survey coordinator, and they're the ones that are organizing the entire survey, facilitating contacts between teams, and tracking progress in the field. Hopefully, they're the ones handling media and arranging any media interviews out in the field. So that's a key thing. Preliminary results in social media. Yep, that person should be doing that. And also informing any EMs about survey results before making those public. I think it's kind of a courtesy thing. But also organizing and arranging meetings with emergency management out there, especially if there's a blocked off region and you have to get a pass. So coordinating with incident responses is absolutely key. Okay, so the night before, now this is assuming we have afternoon tornadoes. So I mean, this may vary depending on when the time of day is, but most of the time it's going to be the night before. The survey coordinator is going to start sending out emails and informing team members we're going to meet, and preferably meet it as early as possible. Remind team members what to bring is another key thing. So coordinator and anybody else should be thinking of these things before. First of all, you have the preliminary track and get that uploaded into the DAT. Okay, everybody's got the AWIPS tool to do that. And make sure all the data is downloaded. In fact, I guess with Parks' talk last time, everybody should have gotten out your cell phones to get it. It could be either the government phone or iPad, personal device. A personal device is different. You have permission. As long as you have it, then that's useful as well. That's what I have on mine. Check availability of any vehicles that you have. A lot of times it's a combination of, we're taking our own vehicles out there. But if you do, then somebody has to track mileage and make sure that you get supported for that. Another one is the track tool to produce estimated track and import to that. Yeah, of course. So there are a few other things to bring along, and I'll talk about that here. Night before the morning, of course, the incident command of access limitations. What kinds of access limitations are there? Will the team be allowed in? And then meet with the EM. We do that a lot because they're really valuable in providing the kind of information that we might not have. So there's a picture in Tuscaloosa in the lower right where we met with the emergency manager for the University of Alabama, for example, and got the lowdown there. But we did others as well. We had one emergency manager, had one in Georgia. His office was the back end of a pickup truck. The county next door managed to get some FEMA funding, and they had a 911 center with reverse calling. And they wound up supporting all the counties around them that weren't so lucky to get such funding. And so it's useful to know who those are because they'll have the resources to handle things. But I'll tell you, the EM out of the back of the pickup knew everybody in that area that he was responsible for, which was an awesome resource. So having that list of who to contact is the one thing that you want to have up to date. Oh, what to bring? I don't know if you can see my screen, but I'll tell you one thing that might not be on here. Can you see this right here? I don't know if you see my video, but I'll put it on anyway.
Yep, we can see it.
All right, sounds great. So yeah, certainly that. Closed toe, heavy shoes, I got those. Preferably something like this. And eyes to the ground for nails that stick out, because obviously if you had steel shank shoes, that would be better, but again, that's a key thing. Some people get in water, so you might want to have a change of shoes. I'll tell you, I've got sunscreen. I bring out and I wear a fanny pack, and I got all my sunscreen in here, bug spray. It's no doubt bugs love damage zones and so forth. I have been burned out in the field quite a bit. First aid kit, yeah. Speaking of, if you haven't had a tetanus shot, it's advisable to get one before you go out. All right, they require one for scouts just to go camping. And out there in a damage zone, there's all sorts of sharp objects. Jacket, hat, gloves, rain gear, water and food snacks. It's often that you no longer have time to have lunch. You're just gonna have to go and be in the car the whole time. In some cases, in disaster zones, the machines might not work for cash. So anything else? What's really important, though, I think, and this is key, is to bring your lanyard with your ID, and preferably a identifiable shirt that lets other people know exactly who you are without even having to ask. So keep those in mind. Otherwise, the cell phone is the go-to tool these days, and having that battery, but please bring a tape measure. So I think that's the key thing. So survey teams. to consider. This is a picture from Valley Brook, Oklahoma, south suburbs of the city. And let's see, one member with Survey 123 experience. You want to be adept at it as possible so you can do those drive-bys without fumbling too much with it. One driver, driver could be somebody with a little bit less experience, except for driving in complex environments, and so to speak, and so forth. So mostly, and this is the way Norman does it, the most experienced team goes to visit the worst damage first. Okay. So out in the field, I think it's a good idea. We always maintain contact with the coordinator, and usually through chat groups. And then it used to be that we would say, please download the points as fast as possible from your mobile device. But Survey 123 has this bad, nasty habit of hijacking your phone if it can't upload the points, and will just continue to hijack it so that you can't use Survey 123. You can't abort it and then start again. It's really weird. It's very annoying. So we suggest waiting until you have good connection and then do a batch download then. Key thing, having one person to talk to residents. Let's maintain that one person and then have somebody else. Ground survey challenges. Yeah, lots of challenges. This is, of course, one problem we have in the plains is you go out there and there's just nothing to damage. Yeah, so that can make your survey really short at times. All right, well, this is a picture. This is Rick took this picture. They're still doing search and rescue. I had this horrible story that came out for the Birmingham office. You know, the MIC there went down to, you know, the southern part of their CWA a couple of years ago, and they're still pulling bodies out of wreckage. In fact, he wound up helping them and wasn't very happy about it afterwards. You know, you really don't need to do that. You don't need to get in the way of search and rescue, and you don't need to experience things we don't have to. Of course, you don't want to wait too late. This often happens, especially with other groups outside of the Weather Service that have to arrange funds and then get there, and now you have a bunch of blue tarps on houses. But you know, there's something to be said about blue tarps, and the one thing is blue tarps means that the house where the belongings inside are salvageable enough that it's worth keeping dry. And so there are certain damage bounds in which that often happens. Oh, blocked roads. This is down in Katy, Oklahoma in 2016. The crews are out replacing power lines. And speaking of, they replace them really quickly. So that next day, they'll be replaced by the end of the day. So Impassable Roads is another one. Here in Oklahoma, the state doesn't do too much of a job of paving back roads, and so they wind up turning to mud, and then some get flooded. Although I'll tell you, I've hit some mud roads in Kansas that I swear, even just almost sitting on flat ground, we start sliding towards a ditch. So always a problem there, or no roads. So that's another issue that we run into. Or restricted access. So this is where you want to get a pass. If you happen to have a major disaster, areas will be blocked off. And so you need to go to incident command first. And then there's weather. We've had lots of storms in the next day. Even on the helicopter ride around Moore that next day, we were dodging storms in the air. And in Florida, believe it or not, we had ice pellets the next day. So I'm sure up in the Midwest, it could be a snowstorm. So time is the other one. You think about the time it takes to do all these things, it always takes more time than you think. So I wind up with, especially when you start talking to emergency managers and residents, survivors love to talk about their experiences. They're still kind of in a high. the depression and of the long path, when they're realizing how bad things are, has not come yet. So that's the time to talk with them. And then walking in dense neighborhoods and things like that. So yeah, it can take a bit of time. All right, yes, this is another one, VIP visits. If you have somebody, that wants to come along, it causes delays. There was another time, there was a national media outlet that was trying to meet with us and trying to chase each other down. Well, they did most of the chasing, but we had to slow down. Yep, and then weather delays. And then finishing up, and then, well, if you're on the far end of your CWA, it's going to take a while to get back. So, not including, to be honest, I eat on the road, and that's it. I mean, sometimes I don't want to waste them, especially during these days. We are not to go to the restaurant. So safety, there's a couple of issues. Broken glass, exposed nails. I think I talked a little bit about that. Loose pets, power lines, holes in uneven ground. Yeah, that's a problem. Media. So this is an issue all the time when you're out there. I've made my mistakes. The key thing, I think, and I'll tell you one thing, there was one time we had a CNN crew in Florida, and I started talking about how expensive it would be to, retrofit one of these buildings to have it survive better. And I quoted an unusually low price. Technically, it was correct, on the order of hundreds of dollars for reclipping, but that doesn't, that doesn't consider the nuances and so forth. So it was a big hot item, to say, wow, that drew a lot of attention, but there's subtleties, because you have to have labor and you have to have time, and retrofitting a building is just darn expensive. So it's really, that cheapness comes building the building in the first place, not really afterwards. So had I done that again, I would have tried to explain those nuances a little bit better and be more reasonable. So key thing is staying in our lanes, so to speak, not conjecturing about things that we don't know for sure. So talking about what we know and avoiding the controversial hot button items, okay, about, missed warnings and things like that. We don't want to go there. We certainly don't want to talk about EF rating, like, we're quoting something that's coordinated through the office. Okay, everything else, the process, basic operations and things like that is the key thing. Okay. Emergency management, again, really useful. First task in the field is to arrive at incident command. Let them know you're in the area otherwise, which is a key thing. They'll probably want to hook up with you at some point. Storm survivors is probably the most difficult thing. And again, just like with my shirt, introduce yourself when you go up, okay? Just be straightforward. Just tell them who you are and why you're here. And definitely ask permission to take any photos or even to step any more onto their property, okay? Be respectful. They just went through an awful day. And again, most of them do want to talk, but take the cue quickly. If somebody doesn't want to talk, leave. Be courteous, careful, to talk. The talk between team members can be overheard. So if you're editorializing on building construction practices and things like that, don't start, let's just not go in certain places, okay? And another one, some of them think they've been through a tornado. You might think otherwise, but don't correct them. This is not the place. So lots of things to avoid. I know how you feel. Be thankful you got out alive. Anything is about God's will, okay? Let's not go there. Not so bad here compared to over there in Noble. Well, it was bad for them. If you're trying to empathize with them, that's okay, but watch out for the don't feel command kind of language, or everything will be okay. Well, they don't know that. These people are going to have to deal with insurance, and they may have injured relatives in the hospital. Some of them may be serious. They're going to have a tough time. Controversial topics, stay away from anything about that, and don't editorialize. This picture here, this is from Katy, Oklahoma. We are seeing people's belongings in broad daylight. We're seeing their private spaces. Okay, so these kinds of things mean that we have got to pay and be humble when we are on their property. The one thing that might help a lot, okay, is something like this, and I've got this on it. On my app as well. So this is psychological first aid, and I have it on here. Sometimes it's useful to bring up. It has ways to think about lanes in which you can deal with survivors. Some of them may ask, who do I contact about funding or getting a check from FEMA and things like that. So I've had that happen. I've had to tell them that I was not FEMA. If you have a phone number or information that's actionable for them, where's the Red Cross? Do you have information on when the EM might know about where, let's say, food and water and shelter might be? Any information EMs know about insurance companies setting up sites for assessors, things like that. Those are actionable and useful for those people. So do respond if they have a question. Talk to what you know about and provide actionable information for them. That will help them a lot. Okay, this is something else here. And this is something that's affected me. It's probably affected some of you. And that is, personnel are ill prepared, meet with survivors. They've had a negative impact. Going through areas of trauma has affected people's productivity later, their emotional well-being. And so because of that, we have a training site, and you probably should see this. It's on the Ocklo site, but it's critical incident stress management. So stress, yeah, it can turn to strain well after a traumatic event. I tell you one thing, to be honest, I went through 2011, that outbreak. I've traveled through 1,000 miles of tornadoes, talked to multiple people that have injured relatives, maybe even worse, and so forth, and none of that bothered me, but some dang little tornado in southern Oklahoma hit me harder than any of that. And I just figure, I think it was just one thing that triggered all those memories at once, and that's when it hit. It's like, yeah, I can be affected as well. So I may be a geek about this stuff, but I'm not vulnerable, that's for sure. So you don't even have to be on the scene. You could be back at the office, and it's after a stretch of severe weather, and it's just starting to wear on you. So think about that, and think about assistance and so forth that NOAA can provide, NOAA Employee Assistance Program, things like that. Just remember that some of these disasters will be coming up, and they'll be coming up this spring. Some of you will be affected. So just try to think about what you will do if you start suffering from this. So anyway, I'm going to stop there for a break and entertain any questions as I gear up for the next part here.
Okay, sure. One question comes from Susan Sanders. What do you do if you absolutely can't get to the site due to blocked roads by debris or flooding, or like me in the high plains, sometimes a blizzard? They've gotten some grief from media for not going out the first day, even though they couldn't get there.
Well, the first thing is that you have defendable excuses for not being able to get there. We've had homeowners complain that, their house was not one of the ones surveyed by the Weather Service on the DAT. So I think we can defend ourselves because of the disclaimers that we have, is that this is not, we are not out there to flag every single point. And if we can't access a place and we don't have the means to, we'll just do the best we can with the information that we have. And that's it. And just try to explain some of the challenges there are with accessing the places, and without being defensive. We just explain it and say that's right now the status of our limitations as warning or as a forecast team. So that's the only thing I could say. To be able to help you is just understand that these should be talking points that every office should have as part of their, as part of the statute. The process of doing this, the limitations, that we have to deal with. So good question.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciated that. This could also be an opportunity for virtual survey help too. For example, if we can't get back there, perhaps someone, that's a government partner with a drone could give us a view to help us out, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. We can rely on, and there are more and more drone operators out there these days, which are more than willing to help out, which I think is so important.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other, oh, just kidding. I have a question. Let's see, Jennifer Preto, what are your thoughts on folks who are personally impacted by a tornado performing or assisting on the damage survey? Their own house was impacted or their family was impacted.
I can't even imagine them being out there doing their job. So that has happened here. So those people are going to be working. I mean, they got to deal with personal issues first. That's the most important thing. So, I mean, if you're actually personally impacted by the tornado, your relatives are, no, you should not be available at that point. You wouldn't do any good anyway. You'd be out there focusing more on the safety and well-being of your family members and yourself and your belongings than doing anything else. So that's happened, and other surrounding offices should offer help, which has happened too. Of course, the ultimate was the 2011 outbreak. I think there were 150 to 200 Weather Service people at one point out there doing surveys. Huntsville office was basically down. There was no power anywhere. So one person, was off work, or was sick. There was another one, the MIC, I think Chris Darden's house was hit. Not major damage or anything like that, but, so there are those kinds of things that you think about. Okay.
I guess there was one other question from Rich Okolski, a fellow April 27, 2011 veteran as myself. In pandemic mode, we're only operating with one employee per vehicle. Any thoughts you have on our current operations? I mean, hopefully this is better and this is the last spring we deal with this, but.
So do I.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I did that too. Actually, we had team members, one person in each vehicle, and we had a smaller sector in each one. Because then, I couldn't just roll the car while somebody else was taking points on the way. I'd actually stop, and then I would take, points along the way, and then start up again. So I would do that kind of thing, which, I guess kind of worked. It just took a longer time. So I had one Yeah, it was April 20th, and we had multiple tornadoes, and I think a couple volunteers. So we just did what we could, but they weren't as dense or anything like that, which still amazes me how the Jackson office was able to pull off what they did last April with that shot that I showed you, which was pretty dramatic.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions at this moment. Let's see. Are there any, actually, here's one. Are there any restrictions on using data only from FAA certified drone pilots?
I don't think there's anything specific to that. I can only guess that if we're ever going to start gaining that responsibility, we'll have to be licensed for it. But hobbyists don't have a specific requirement for certification, as far as I know. Although I know some of them have gone from being hobbyists to actually doing it as a profession, so to speak, and then yeah, that would be different.
Okay, and one of the last ones, just to confirm, based on the current directives, we need to be doing the contours for EF2 plus tornadoes, correct?
Okay, there is no requirement. There's a strong suggestion, like,
okay,
we encourage you to do so, or strongly suggest. So this is, I think, in deference to the region saying that in some cases it's just going to be impossible. We have higher priorities in the office, or the tornado just is in an area that doesn't afford contouring.
Okay, that makes sense. I believe that's all the questions we have. So if we want to go ahead with the second portion of the presentation, we can dive right in.
Okay, hang on a second. Let me get that up. I have the next part of the presentation. We're going to be talking about tornado track analysis, and so I definitely want to at least bring up that kind of thing here. But dang it, I seem to have lost my presentation. So stand by as I pull it up again. Okay. I have a couple cases. I think some of you have seen a handout that was shown up in the, do you see that at least?
All we see right now is your presentation. Let me see if I can see handout. I don't see handout at this time.
Okay, it's the one that you sent, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay, and I can share, copy link. Okay, and I have the link now, so I will post that in the chat. So everybody, let's see, actually.
All right, so these are stalling tactics. Anyway, so I got this going. Here we go.
Okay, the link is now in chat. It's a Google Doc link.
Okay, so we'll be using that here. And I don't know how many, I just put 2 links in there of 2 places with tornadoes that are in wildly different scenes, and it might help answer some of the questions that I saw earlier. So it's a whole bunch of stuff. I tell you, this is, hopefully you're seeing this. Yeah, you are. Okay, so it's lots of names, attributes to tornado tracks that we have to deal with, and I'll try to explain these. Track start and end, the track center line, the confluence line, track perimeter, and then the contouring in between. And so let me go and just start off with, first of all, I think we talked about the transects, so I'm not going to go through this in so much detail as I am talking about these things. There's some really cool science going on lately, using tree fall patterns to assess tornado strength, literally by this tree fall model where you see that, as soon as the wind hits a certain range, there's this probability of tree fall, and of course, probability increases as the wind increases. And if you run a tornado model across with attributes that somewhat reflect the real conditions out there, you can actually come up with tree fall patterns that change. And depending on the storm motion and how much inflow there is relative to rotation, you can actually backtrack the intensity, this to a certain reasonable degree. But the other thing it kind of shows is how damage patterns kind of manifest themselves out in the field and what you might see, either from aerial imagery or being on the ground. And so one thing is, of course, it's and there's several questions, that come out of this, when you look at aerial imagery and ground, all the ground points and so forth. And that is, where do I draw the outer boundary? Where do I draw the track of the tornado? So I'm gonna suggest a couple things here. Hopefully it'll make it easy, and these are going to be based on some of the things that you see out there. So I have this rather ideal tree fall pattern here on the right, and you can see some pretty interesting things. You see a lot of times the tree fall is, you'll see a pattern where the trees are falling towards the direction of the tornado, where it's coming from, and sometimes it might be different than where the max damage is. In this case here, this wind speed, this contour shows the highest values actually dislocated off of the what we call the confluence line. That's the confluence of damage patterns. So sometimes that happens. A lot of times, though, it doesn't, and so forth. But the interesting thing is that a lot of times the actual vorticity center of the tornado is going to be at a different line than either of these. We can't really tell, looking at a damage path, where the actual eye of the tornado, the vortex center itself, went. So instead, we're using other cues and so forth that we can measure, like the max damage line and the confluence line. So what is this confluence line? It's large debris, even actually smaller debris, it's all the way down to just wheat chaff and so forth. Where does it accumulate? And where do tree fall? Where do the patterns tend to converge? And so a classic example is this one, where you have this herringbone shape tree fall pattern, and really kind of points to where that confluence line is, down a line. So this is the most common. Okay, maybe from the ground it looks like this. It's like literally two trees that are leaning on each other because they're falling in different directions. And so you get that kind of bizarre behavior right there. Debris accumulation, that's another one. If you look down a field or something like that, and you see a lot of smaller stuff just kind of congregate somewhere, it usually congregates in that confluence line too. Okay, aerial imagery, it shows up a little bit, like these whitish marks and so forth. Often people think that's scouring, but more often than not, it's debris accumulation. So here's another example in Lady Lakes, Florida area, where you have another herringbone pattern that you see just based on these patterns right here. The trees slightly converging on each other. But here on the crops, this is Kevin Sco and out of Sco and Gogol sent me this picture here from their publication, looking at likely accumulation zones right there. So that's the easy part. If you got that damage direction, you can look at it. I wish there was a way to display damage direction like arrows, like I've shown here on the DAP, but they haven't cracked that nut before, so you'll have to actually look at the attributes when you identify a DI. But it can be helpful. Even more helpful if you have notes, comment, and you put, debris or confluence, or that's a rather long word, something at least indicates, hey, you found the spot. Some tornadoes don't have them. Fast moving weak tornadoes tend to just have a strong linear high aspect ratio track with a sharp left edge. Sharp left edge is because the winds on the left side of the vortex are basically canceling out the forward motion, leaving sometimes no wind and you wind up with, you know, little or no damage. So anyway, those are things where, in this case here, it's a tough one here where you draw the line. More often than not, the vortex center is going to be on the left side of the track. So you might want to be close to that with your line. So it has to be obvious. So, you know, otherwise you would go with the max damage. Oh, here's another tough one. Where do you draw the center line of the tornado here? So multi-vortex tracks with loops, things like that. You certainly don't draw the center line in loops. You probably just draw it straight down the middle of the path, so to speak, you know, somewhere down the line like that. It's not great, but it's a compromise because we're trying to get close to the, you know, where the true tornado center is. Strong, slow-moving tornadoes, the Joplins of the world, will tend to produce rather large circular treefall patterns, reverse treefall, and sometimes crisscross treefall. You know, where tornado drops the trees in front of it, some of them, and then drops the rest afterwards as the center goes by. So we'll see that often a lot. And yeah, that's a problem there. And I just draw the center line out in the middle like this for lack of a better solution, at least at this point, hoping that I'm pretty close to where the actual center went through, the center line. Here are some examples. I got herringbone pattern on the left, Rochelle, Illinois, back in 2015. So that was an EF3, moving fairly quickly, probably about 40 to 50 miles an hour, being an early spring event. In the middle, I don't know if you can see the arrows here, I've got treefall in reverse pattern here. This one made a stronger convergence or confluence than these treefall models, so it was pretty clear where to put it. You know, the arrows, treefall coming almost due north on the south side, and then to the west on the north side up here on this. And then we have, during the 2011 outbreak, got Halleyville, Alabama. Just this, again, as I mentioned, fast-moving, weak tornado, and the vortex center is likely on the left side of the track. You can see this, where on the left side, there's just no wind at all. So all that's damaging winds on the right side. So those are kind of the extremes of all ends right there. And most of the time, you're going to see this on the left. Now, sometimes if you don't have high resolution aerial and you can't reach the tornado, then you don't have any choices. We're going to deal with that. So where to start and end the center line? I'm just going to go back to an old thing. I tend to drive back towards the center points. If we go out as a team, our #1 priority is getting the worst damage. So let's say if it's a tornado of 2 teams, what we tend to do is arrive at the worst damage somewhere in the middle, if we know about the worst damage, that is. And then we'll peel off in opposite directions. So team 1 this way and team 2 that way. And just work it out until we run out of damage. A lot of times, though, there's going to be downdraft damage on the beginning end of the track as the mesocyclone consolidates. It'll be broad, it won't be particularly intense. And also on the end, storm gusts out, you get a big downburst going, and you may see broadening and fanning out of the debris. So if you see fanning out, that's, you know, none of that's any good. You know, this is the point where you just end it because you run out of the most intense stuff. That's pretty narrow. And some patterns, you know, I won't have an answer. I mean, there's something where you just have to use your best judgment because there's that gray zone between one category and another, downdraft, outflow versus tornado. So we all understand that. Nobody's perfect and nobody has the right answer either, so you won't be graded. Okay, so anyway, I think what I want to do, let me see, at this point is I'm going to go through and talk about perimeter analysis. So stand by. Just briefly, and I better end here. So the next few minutes, I'll just talk about this perimeter and contouring. This is where, of course, it's encouraged. Contouring and perimeters, EF2 and stronger. Doesn't have to be a Ted Fujita level of detail. So you don't have to work every single inflow channel in JET, but just detailed enough that people can use this information for theirs. So yeah, I brought this up Bassfield again with Jackson, which has enough information by itself to produce a contouring analysis. But often I like to use aerial imagery. So the key thing here is if you're going to use and make these contours, then it's nice to have the ground points as anchors, okay, to basically calibrate yourself to it. So the reason why I say that is you get some weird reflectances with the aerial imagery. This is actually WorldView satellite imagery. It's 30 centimeter resolution. It's not great, but it's enough detail that you can see whether you're looking at a foundation, or a rooftop that might be damaged over here, for example. And so if you have the before and after imagery, you can kind of see the delta and the change in things. And so I had these ground points, okay? And then sometimes I might have scars and things like that on the ground that appear next to the ground points and then go across. And then I might have another one over here that wasn't surveyed, okay? I have a point, well, I have a point on that one, but maybe this one here. And so it might give me an idea of where, it's like, well, that one looks similar to this one that has a survey and it's a similar structure. So I'll use that to guide my contouring. So that's basically what I would do, at least here, to help use the anchoring points to calibrate myself to the appearance of objects that are not surveyed and to help with contouring. The same thing is with vegetation. We got ground points here, a picture of vegetation. Here it is. Now we see it in this case, the Pleiades. No, this is WorldView. All right, these two areas right here. But wait, this whole area looks the same. Denuded. I see massive tree fall. I can actually see a couple trunks in there. So I'll go ahead and include all of those. But I don't see it down here. So I'm going to end my contour. I'll probably end it somewhere in the field. Exactly where, I'm not sure, but certainly between these two forest plots, and leave it there. Okay. Likewise here, this is a view where I've got some houses that were surveyed, a couple of EF3s and EF2s, and pretty close to this I see some scouring in this open field. So I'm going to say, yeah, okay. Downstream along the track of the tornado, I see the scouring. It looks very similar to this. And then that scouring continues on up to here. So maybe I'll extend my contour up and include these portions of that field just to encapsulate the ground appearance that is shared across the whole area. Probably not too far, because now suddenly in this bare field, I don't see too much of that scouring. So I might stop it there. So these kinds of non-DIs can help a little bit. Other satellite-based assistance. Well, okay, here is a Sentinel-2 multispectral satellite. Thank you, European Space Agency. It's a nice satellite, and they provide this data for free. So here I'm now looking at vegetation disturbance. This is a true color image, and here's the Bassfield, and there it is, defoliation greater than EF2. I can also use the normalized difference in vegetation index. I can even take the difference between that NDVI and maybe earlier, a week earlier, or at the same time last year, and then flip back and forth and look at the delta there. All right. Speaking of NDVI, a lot of research, especially after the 2011 outbreak, given deciduous trees in growth, okay, warm season, they found that most of the tracks that were visible were EF3 and greater. with that transition occurring at EF2. So this is the area where whole tree sectors, forests, woods, crops, things like that. And I'm not talking about corn, I'm talking about others, soybeans, more resilient, wheat. They tend to get scoured, tend to lose their vegetation and so forth. So that EF2-3 area, border right there, starts to really appear. Okay. Let's see, marking the outer border is probably the most difficult one of all. This is where the aerial is really important, but also, down at ground. One is that your damage is going to get a lot more intense with the tornado. So there's going to be a noticeable uptick. But in case there isn't, then it's going to be the damage direction that's really important. And so I got that here where maybe I have some diffluent pattern. And that may be downburst, a lateral downburst on that side. And then maybe I have non-divergent pattern in a tornado. So divergent patterns are things to probably not draw or encapsulate within the tornado, but the divergent patterns go. So I go way back to this. It's the old Fujita paper from Windsor Locks on October 3rd, 1979, which actually to this day is a really nice visual display of that area, which is downburst, and that area, which is tornado. Another thing too, if it's tornado, the wind is accelerating in towards the core of the vortex. So the damage gradient is going to appear like that. Downbursts, the wind typically decelerates from the axis. So if you see accelerating flow, all right, you're in the tornado wind field, and that means that should be included. So that might help, figuring out where this dotted line should go and mark that. Okay, I got this really tough one. I got this case here. All right, I got a couple cases, but oh boy, I want to show you this one. Let's get out of this one here. Hang on a second. My computer's freaking out. Let me escape out of that. There we go. Okay, so this is actually Google Earth imagery, believe it or not. And I'm going to zoom in. This is Northwest Pennsylvania. And Matt Kramer found this. He started getting curious about, what does Google Earth imagery show? Because he had a line back in 2017, and Google came across and redid the aerials, and bam, there it is, tree damage. And he started thinking, wow, and he looked at the radar and said, well, that kind of associates pretty well with this squall line mesovortex that went through this area. And so he came up and showed me, and it's like, yeah, there's some tough stuff in here. It's a combination of downbursts and likely tornadoes. And so I'm going to ask you guys, what do you think? Is this a pattern associated with the tornado or a pattern with downdraft? North is pointing up. And if you guys have any responses or anything like that, you can just go ahead and share with Ryan.
Not seeing any just yet. I personally am trying to look at I can see the roots and which direction the trunk comes off the roots.
That's right.
And it looks like there is somewhat of a mix between trees that have fallen from north to south and then from south to north. So from that, I would say tornado, but I'm not totally sure if I'm seeing it right.
Yeah, I know this is going to be a tough one. Let's see if we have any. I should have made this into a survey or something like that, but
okay,
willing to entertain.
We have a vote for divergent downburst.
Okay.
Maybe a confluence pattern to the east of the current view. That was another comment in there.
All right, a lot of uncertainty and so forth. If there's a general trend, let me know. Otherwise, I'll give you some thoughts here.
Another comment, we'd have to zoom in more. Sharp edge on the northern side suggests tornado.
Okay.
Downburst, left center, divergent trees, laying. So it does seem like there's kind of a mix and uncertainty on what exactly we're looking at.
Yeah. So some considerations, let me zoom out a bit. One is, okay, this isn't a strong event. You know, certainly strong enough to knock down a good portion of trees, but this is not something that, you know, is very clear either way. But some considerations. First of all, it might help to say, okay, this is just the overall mesovortex was moving out of the southwest. All right, so I didn't provide that info, I'm sorry, but it shows where, if you knew the context of the situation, then it might help. So anyway, this is, if that's the case, then if it was a tornado and we expect its motion out of the southwest, it might, you might cast some doubt as to whether this was one, because this northern edge is linear east-west. All right, so yeah, it could be anomalous tornado motion, understood. The other thing too is a lot of the tree fall pattern, I know there's some variations, but a lot is generally pointed to the north and kind of perpendicular to this edge, which is rather sharp. So that kind of points to stronger convergence than vorticity. So that's one thing that might lead you away. Certainly, I know there's variations on tree fall, some to the northwest and some to the north, and a couple, maybe a few more to the northeast over here. So that's some things that might help. When we get up here, now we have the orientation a little bit different. All right, so you see the difference here. You know, a case could be made for both, but any comments out there?
Yeah, I see this version, the orientation of the trees is different from the other pattern in terms of the direction they were blown.
Yes.
So we have a comment, downburst, axis of damage extending northeast. Yeah, this one's tough. I agree with you. And let's see.
Nobody has the answer for this, by the way. So this is kind of, I think
Sure.
really it's exercising what's going through your mind when you're trying to come up with an answer. That's the important thing.
Another comment, more convergent along the right path. Tornado is on the right.
Okay.
More downburst, let's see, more downburst like on the left.
All right. I can see that. Maybe it's a little more fatter on the left side. Less of an aspect ratio. You know, it's a low aspect ratio event here. Maybe slightly diffluent. I can understand that. I also want you all to consider that, again, here's the tree fall pattern. If we assume the wind at the point of tree fall is parallel to the tree fall, then think about the vorticity along the left edge. I mean, there's something to be said about that, although there is a sharp right edge as well. I understand. You know, that's a possibility, although there's maybe a few more fallen trees on the right side than the left side. So, you know, these are things you can think about. If one of them was going to be a tornado, it's perhaps more likely that this one is more likely a tornado than this one here or that other one that I showed you. And that, I think, is really some of the kinds of things to think along those lines. Certainly, you know, and hopefully, you know, you have radar that's nearby that, you know, you can see the offending vortex if there is one. But again, mesovortices are very good at producing these maybe sort of, and I don't know exactly what. So you tend to parse together you know, what's most likely a quick spin-off versus another. You can only be so lucky if you have a debris pattern visible on radar. It's more often than not you have this. And, you know, if you look at that, you know, event that Kevin Scow and Kogel wrote about up in Iowa, 35 of these things, and many of them, you know, would give SPC a real heartache if we call them tornadoes. So anyway, that was that. Now I'm going to go to another scene here, and I think I'm kind of changing out things a little bit, so please forgive me.
Jim, do we have time for a quick question?
Yeah, go ahead.
How much of a domino effect is there? Trees falling like this in a forest. How much of a domino effect is there?
Domino, collateral damage, in other words. Yeah, I mean, I can't rule it out, and I never will, because I wasn't there to see how the trees are falling. So I could say that, you know, it's certainly a possibility. I don't have a good warm fuzzy saying that, you know, it's going to be responsible for the majority of tree fall inside of forests, but, you know, it's certainly not something to discount. Always a thing that troubles me, and like you saw there, there's a very sharp gradient between almost no tree fall and a high percentage of tree fall, and that concerns me. Now, a lot of that could be because you may have certain monocultures, and I think this is something that Gene Brusky showed me from a derecho last 2 years ago in northern Wisconsin, where certain tree plots had almost 100% tree fall. The next one to it doesn't have hardly any. And so a lot goes to saying, okay, and these should be questions to answer when you're there, is what's the diversity of tree species and sizes in any wooded plot? If it's if it is a tree farm, you know, warehouser, it's a logging industry owns this, or if it's a crop like pecan farm or apple trees, the answer is there's going to be a very sharp line between very few and an awful lot of trees that will come down. But if you have natural wooded land, the older it is, the more diverse it is, and that sharp peak broadens out. So your probability space broadens out. And then you can get a better handle on, you know, wind speed to tree fall percentage relationship.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Jim.
I hope that answered it, because there's a lot of uncertainties here. I want to go to this exercise 2. And this one here, since I only have some limited time, I wanted to point out a few things here. So I hope you don't mind. I left 2 cases for you. They're on the test stat. If anybody needs that URL, I can share that with you. This could be a whole afternoon lab, by the way. So, you know, I know, Ryan, you and I were talking about, can we do an exercise and have you all follow along? And I think that's going to be difficult, you know, because of the amount of time really needed to pour into the data. So I left you some directions to look at 2 wildly diverse cases. And there's others too. We got the, this is the Nashville tornado, Cookeville, Tennessee. I got one from southern Oklahoma last April. And then the Fultondale tornado in Birmingham, and then Monroe, Louisiana from last year. They're all in there. I did not get anything from Central Region. Why is that? I think, I don't know if they had the full suite of imagery, but that could be done. It could be done. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and pull up my layers here. And I'm actually going to divert a little bit from that, because some really interesting things came up as I was just looking at this. All right, so I'm going to get to the worst of it here. but I'm going to start over here. Okay, everybody see this okay?
Yes,
I'm going
I
to zoom
can.
in a little bit. So we have that. Now it's really cool with the current DAT is we had this agreement with this insurance group that flies planes after damaging tornadoes, and they do it more often than NOAA does when they fly the P3. And they offer it to us for free to use. So it's a really sweet agreement. So they put it on the NOAA Geo server. Let's see if I can get this to display. There we go. You can kind of see the seams a little bit here, but as I zoom in, let's see if yeah, this is it. Hopefully you can see pretty well, or at least decent enough what's going on here. And this is where the aerial imagery serves. We have a challenge. We have one data point here with a 4. We got a 3 here, and we got just zeros. What? 0 less than 20%. Another one less than 20% here, and then this one down here, rated EF2, 115 mile an hour peak gust. Well, that's right next to one that's 160. No, that's 115. Sorry. I think this one was 160. Is that right? Yeah, 165. And then this 4 over here, 170. So we have, again, this problem. It's like, how do you draw a contour around this? Gee whiz, it's going to be kind of crazy. You could draw, I guess, a specific line or a contour right through here, including, just these 2 houses and bridge the 2, include this one. Okay, then if you look at the lower, the F2, what does the F2 do? This, something like that. That would be kind of crazy. So this is where the power of being there really helped, because there's 2 things. One is the power of the aerial imagery, and then the power of being there. The aerial imagery comes in. Okay, I'm going to max out my brightness here. Hopefully this helps, because I get the tree fall pattern. So here we are. This tornado's coming in from the west, and you see the tree fall pattern here almost due south coming in. South, southeast, south, and so forth. All right, meanwhile, there's some trees up here in the old imagery. Now, it's going to be hard. I don't know if I could zoom in anymore. Maybe. There we go. Some of these trees are falling to the west, like this one, and so forth, and a couple others. And you also notice that the damage pattern on the house, the wind is hitting the houses from the north. These are not where the garages are. These are where the wind has hit, quite likely gable roof end or something like that, because they're unusually vulnerable, and has shredded the north end of the houses. Okay, so these are rated EF2. And this is rated higher, okay, than these. We should have been rated higher than these because of where they are relative to the tornado. And as it turns out, this is where my wife Daphne came in. So she was interviewing the people there last year, and found out this house was built by a builder. And this house was built really tough. He built both of these houses like that. And so these actually go way above normal resistance levels here. And you didn't know that. I mean, you'd be drawing your contours around this and saying, forget this. But, this is where the problem with damage to wind relationship comes from. Because here we are contouring ratings, damage intensities. But instead, what we should be doing is raising that slider in the wind bar all the way to the right, for these two, so that we have a more reasonable match with something like this off to the north, or especially the south. And I think that's where, we do that. We may have, and maybe should have rated these a little bit higher than just an 80 mile an hour. Maybe it should be as high as you can, and to do that. But there's also, the problem with our current scale is our, let's say, distribution of potential wind speeds with any degree of damage is not wide enough. All right, and it potentially could be wider. So that's something that sometimes I've run into this, by the way, on the other end of the spectrum, where we have really crappily built houses. And I will never say that in front of the homeowner, but my gosh, I was shocked to see what they were living in afterwards. And I couldn't, and it was completely swept away. And I could not go low enough, to match what I thought the wind speed was there. So I literally used a lower degree of damage, all walls down instead of slab swept clean, for example, to account for that. So, the aerial imagery showing the tree fall pattern, reverse tornado. This tornado is moving to the east at 45 miles an hour. It's very quick. And so it takes an exceptionally strong tornado to blow trees down opposite its motion, or, to hit like you do see up there. So I think this was everything of the violent tornado that we've been rated. I think that was accurate. Oh, by the way, this house down here was another equivalently strong building, so you can see the level of damage is not concurrent with its neighbors for the same reason. So again, and actually there they could see the details down below. But overall, I mean, when I see this percentage of tree fall, the orientation, which I see here, as well as up here as well, the wind, it says that we have a strong tornado. The tornado, was equivalently strong all the way through here, this neighborhood, pretty much, and therefore we should think about having the contours in such a way that it somewhat matches. But our confidence would have been a lot lower had we not known, about the details of these houses and this one here. So, and the same goes on all the way through. Trying to tie in the tree fall pattern and with the actual damage. I want to show you one last thing. I'm going to go off to the west here, and this is a point where I think I was directing it towards, because we have some nice tree fall cross sections. As soon as this imagery clears up a bit. Okay. So I drew the center line down here. The reason why I did that is it was a long track. So in a large view, I just drew some contours and center line in general area so that when I can zoom in, I can finesse the contouring and so forth. So here actually is where the confluence line is. You can see it very nicely. But if you notice here, these trees on the left side of the track are not reverse trees, blowing towards the direction the tornado came from. They are blowing to the southeast, and we have a classic herringbone pattern. And that says to me that, yeah, this tornado, I mean, the tree fall looks nasty, but it just doesn't quite have the meat that it does later on when the tornado further matured. And, I can see that in this shelter belt, and then these over here on the right. So again, it's more the same. It's still a very sharp confluence zone. So this, this is no slouch of a tornado or anything like that, but not quite the strength that I had it before over there. Here's another one. Again, herringbone pattern, center, a confluence line right through the middle there. Looks pretty darn close to the zone of max damage too, as you can see with this house on the left. So there you have it right there. With again, this debris is actually blown downwind, so to the east, whereas the trees kind of fell a little bit in advance of the tornado, and then the roof came off probably as the tornado was sweeping right overhead. So I'll just stop there. I wish we had time to to do some more exercises. I would love to show you the completely rural tornado, but if you follow those directions there, you can see what a completely rural tornado looks like with the imagery. You just have to log into that test and not the operational version, and then set the date times right. And if we can share you the link to the DAT tests on chat as well if need be. So any questions, at least where I am at this point?
Okay,
And,
there were a couple questions. One question was, what's your opinion on the usage of EFU? I guess, you know,
for storm data?
yeah.
Okay. Oh, contentious. I'll tell you one thing. Well, let's make it clear. The directives say to use EFU when you have no damage indicators, but you are reasonably confident that there was a tornado. Like there was video of a tornado where you saw debris on radar. Something that says, yeah, under most circumstances, this thing qualifies as a tornado, but nothing to pin it down on. So that's the time to use EFU. I know I've had some rather vigorous discussions with some offices, a couple offices. And in fact, actually, I got in the middle of an internal dispute at the Amarillo office. One side saying, you got to use EF0 because there's no damage, but we know there's a tornado. The problem with that argument is that when somebody wants to use this for climatology and uses these EF0s, then suddenly we have a lot of EF0s and the climatology becomes, the risk level becomes a lot less than if we just use the tornadoes that we had some data for and so forth. And I think I don't want to, I think that's the reason behind it. So if you think about some of the heavy users of climatology, this is SBC and NSSL and, some field offices out there, inappropriately labeling tornado can lead to some wrong conclusions at the end. So really what we want to do is just acknowledge their existence, but if we're trying to do some intensity climatology, we just can't use them because we don't know.
And that makes sense. I've been forced to use EFU a decent amount out here in Goodland just because there are plenty of parts of my area that unless it's snapping power poles, it's literally hitting nothings. But then I get pictures on Twitter and Facebook from emergency management showing me that tornado.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Another question we have, where, this comes from Joe Moore, where do you put metadata that doesn't necessarily fit in the DAT?
Such as?
Let me see here. I'm trying to go back to his question and find it. Interviews, extra photos, news articles.
All right, so actually you could put those in the DAT now. And the reason is if I actually did that, I don't know about the identify part. If I added a point, let's say I add a point here. Let's see, that's a tornado point. If you remember from Parks Camp's discussion about the kinds of data that you can put in here, you can put in a photo, but more than that, you can actually put in a PDF, and you can put in a PDF. So you can make a document as a PDF and then put it in. We were talking about that because there's some sticky things in there. First of all, that document cannot have any PII. So it'd be best if you are going to try that to make sure the office is on board, the office management. I don't know how high we have to go on this. It's never really been discussed that much with the performance branch, the storm data lead in there. But Gordon should be brought into this because we haven't had that discussion about how far do we want to take that capability into that? Because if we do put in something in there, and you allow it, you QC it, it's going to be in the public space. I'm just trying to figure out. I think I have to edit this thing here. Oh, let's double click on moving it, because I know I can do that. I can put in stuff in, through the 123 app, but I wasn't clear on that. But I think Parks went through that with the last session here a couple weeks ago. Let's see, what else was that? Oh, there's one thing in the future. I know a lot of social scientists would love to get some simple questions into this identify tool for you to ask anybody that you come across up there. So they're formulating that right now, and I think Jennifer Sprague is in that, along with some a couple other social scientists. So that may be coming.
I guess one other question I had, you said your wife is social scientist, and she was doing some follow-up on that survey you were showing us here.
Yes.
And she figured out the houses were built differently. They weren't built to code, they were built above code. How do you ask about that, and make sure you don't let other people around seem like their house wasn't built as well, because that's something you had missed about being courteous and
being courteous. Yeah, so I will not. I stay away from volunteering information, if you will, because I'm afraid of opening up a can of worms that I just might regret later on. So instead, what I'll do, I don't know if I have a picture of this. I should see if I do. No, maybe I have it from my talk with the Wichita, Kansas folks. And what is this old story? You might have heard this before, but it was the builder I talked to in I wish I had it here. It was the builder I talked to in Moore, Oklahoma, that got hit by a tornado, and this is after the new codes were put in place. Oh, blast. Yeah, I know I just had it. Anyway, he talked about, he was starting to talk about how he built it and how he was proud. And then we kind of looked up there at the top of the roof peak, and that's, of course, where all the roof decking came off. It did not, the roof was firmly attached to the top plates of the, to the walls. So, I mean, the code worked there. It did as planned, but not up at the top. And that's where I think we started looking at it closer, and he goes, I guess I shouldn't have stapled that house. It's like, I kind of agreed at that point, like, yeah, I mean, that's something that maybe you didn't want to do. And so then he, sheepishly said it, and here's that picture right up here. And so you see very typical damage. The roof decking and the roof peak came off, but it did not separate at the walls. And so close-up view shows these staples. That's not up to code. That should be nailed on 6-inch intervals, anywhere where there's a rafter, okay, along the edges, and 12 inches in the middle of these panels, these decking panels. So he did everything according to spec, except for this last mile right here, and that's what the tornado took advantage of. So, but he led that discussion, and that was fine. I was fine with that. So that was that house. And don't feel too bad for him, by the way, because this is his second house right next door.
Nice. Okay. Well, Jim, I'm not seeing any other questions, and I see we're out of time here. So I just want to say thank you again for being willing to talk to us. We really appreciate your insight. I know I learned a lot from this discussion, and you brought up some great points for me to take back and think about at my own office. So thank you for being willing to present and taking time out of your day to talk to us. We will render the recording and have that sent out at a later time. Our next talk, I believe, is March 31st with Tim Marshall about construction practices and the implications that can have on your ratings. And you know, I'm sure something along the lines of what we were just seeing. So, Jim,
Yeah,
thank you
Ryan,
again. No, go ahead.
one final thing. I'm sorry about interrupting.
No, you're fine.
My colleague at NIST, who runs the wind speed impact reduction program, is working with a contractor to come up with a smart damage indicator. I don't know if Tim is going to talk about this or not, but if anybody's interested in trying it out, just let me know. Get through with me and so forth. So we're seeing a kind of testing ease of use and so forth. But anyway, just get in touch with me.
Okay, I will do that. Well, Jim, thank you again. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we will talk to you next time. Take care, everybody.
All right. Thank you very much.